Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our PRCA and the Work Crowd webinar on the rise of the independent consultant and the benefits of collaborating. I'll just let everyone start joining the room and joining this webinar, but I'm delighted to be hosting this on behalf of the PRCA and the Work Crowd. My name is Alice Waitman. I'm the founder of two talent businesses, a traditional headhunting company called Hanson Search, and also the Work Crowd, which is an online platform that connects businesses directly to really talented freelancers across marketing and communications. I'm also the chair of the independence group for the PRCA, hence hosting this webinar today. And we actually host regular webinars for the independent community, the freelance community, really as an opportunity to share ideas, share best practice, bring people together, and also collaborate and encourage collaborating. So it's great to be talking about this topic today. And, you know, we've seen a huge rise in the use of freelancers and also individuals looking to freelance. So it's great to be sort of discussing this topic and how it's really had a great impact on both people's careers, but also businesses. And I'm joined today by Rod Cartwright and Alison Shadrack, who are going to be sort of giving a slightly different perspective. So Rod has over 25 years in European and global big agency businesses before he made that move to becoming independent in 2019, and now acts as a board advisor and independent counsellor to senior executives across the world. Alison, again, is an extensive background in communications. She's a serial entrepreneur with 20 years of experience in international PR. She is the founder of two international businesses in B2B and B2C e-commerce, and is a PR advisor to some of the UK's top entrepreneurs and disruptors. So it's going to be great to hear about both of your backgrounds, Alison and Rod, but also, you know, what you're seeing in terms of the rise of freelancers. The webinar will last about 45 minutes. I'll first of all let Alison and Rod chat about their background on this topic, but then please do use the functionality at the bottom to ask questions to both of our panelists. So let's make this a lively debate. And Rod, I think I'm going to kick off with yourself, actually. Perhaps you could give us a sort of bit of a flavour of what led you to becoming an independent and what you're seeing in the market at the moment.
Absolutely. I was going to go ladies first, but I'm happy to oblige if you'd wish. Now, Alison shaking her head. So, Alice, thank you again for inviting me to join this session. So, as Alice said, I took the leap into the world of independence right at the end of 2019. So, obviously, doing that just ahead of a general election, Brexit, and a global pandemic was about as wonderful a piece of timing as you could possibly imagine. But joking aside, it's been a fascinating time. As we may discuss later, my main expertise is in sort of reputation, crisis and issues management, and there are worse times in the economic and sort of world cycle to be in that area. So my background, incredibly briefly, as Alice said, was 25 years in big agencies, 10 years as sort of public affairs and government relations person, worked for the Labour Party in '97 in Millbank when there was a Labour Party capable of being elected. I didn't say that. Then spent the next 15 or so years working for some of the global networks. So 5 years at GCI in Hill and Knowlton, a decade at Ketchum, 7 years of which was running their global corporate team, and then 2 years running Text 100, now Archetype, across the MEA. I think the decision was really two or threefold. Firstly, it was kind of an itch that I'd wanted to scratch for a while, and it was just a question of getting the courage up. The second, frankly, was the old bumper sticker, fridge magnet thing of, you know, if not this, then what, if not me, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I turned 50 and thought there has to be a time when I back myself rather than my employer. And the third was, frankly, I believed and believe that in the area that I specialize in, there are different ways of doing things that don't per se need the scale and resource of a global or even a UK-wide network. So that's my journey in a very, very brief nutshell. Don't know if that's enough, too much.
Yeah, lovely, perfect. Alison, do you want to give us a bit about your background?
Okie dokie. So unlike Rod, I've probably done it the other way around. Just to explain a little bit, I started off at the European Commission in Brussels, organising international events. So it was in the Department of Energy there. So we were disseminating information about renewable technology. So organising international conferences, exhibitions, that sort of thing. I moved on then from Brussels to Accenture in London. So spent a very small amount of time at Accenture. And then went to New York working for a property firm. So all the time it was sort of PR, marketing roles. And it was then, I really sort of felt I wanted to start my own business from a young age. Then I was in my early 20s. I was in my late 20s when I sort of wanted to go into my own business. And the first stint for me was with an Italian company that were producing Italian sort of artisanal products, food products. So the lovely sort of hams and olive oils and cheeses, lovely different, food products. And what they were doing, it was like one of the very early online companies. And I thought, this is, an amazing idea, what they've put together, this concept of bringing all these different artisanal products from all around Italy, so packaging them up and selling them to people. Like, this didn't happen, it's very easy to find today, but it wasn't, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, sorry. So I thought, well, this sounds like a really great idea to bring to the UK. And so that's what I did. That was one of my first business ventures, was launching them in the UK to really, good success. It was very early days of internet, e-commerce. And it was very hard to grow online. So I really focused on the PR, bringing this all back to PR. We had to rely on PR to grow, because people weren't looking online in those early days. There was no social media. I mean, can you imagine? Like, no social media is crazy. How do you drive people to a website to buy? Nobody wanted to use their credit cards online. It was a whole, everything we did for the PR was educating people, changing behavior. And it was at that point I really fell in love with PR. Even though it was my background, I really just loved everything that it could do to help launch a business. And so it was from then that I set up my own business, doing a similar thing with e-commerce and food, Italian food. And from that, then, to cut a very long story short, it was then that I thought, well, actually, I would really love to do this for other companies, to really show them how PR can be so powerful in growing your business from day one. It's not just for the big guys, it's very much for small businesses to help you just, skyrocket. So that's why, I launched Adia 2013, so 7 years ago. And yeah, we've just been growing ever since. It's been a very interesting 7 years. It's flown by, but yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way. I just love it.
Great, thank you, Alison. That's really, really nice to get us a background setting. And I think also interesting because, Rod, obviously you're as an independent at the moment, and Alison, I know you use independence as well in your agency. So let's deep dive into the rise of this independent, the rise of the freelancer. I read a stat pre-COVID that done by McKinsey, that by 2027, 50% of the workforce would be working independently. Post-COVID, they produced some more research that said 70% of executives were more likely to use freelancers and independents as a result of COVID. So first of all, Rod, what do you think is causing this rise of the freelancer, and what is the impact that you've seen as a result of COVID and as we come out of lockdown, which I know this week is a big week for everyone as we sort of easing out.
Yeah, indeed. So I think, I mean, it's interesting when you look back at the past year, a lot of people have been saying that COVID has changed the world forever, had ushered in a whole new normal. And I don't buy that at all. For me, COVID, in almost every sense, has been a sort of accelerant for dynamics that were happening already. I think that you're seeing, if there was a debate around mental health, well-being, diversity, inclusion, social responsibility, corporate transparency, that has been accelerated and then some by COVID. In parallel, I think, with ESG being on the rise and the rise and the rise. So I think those parallel dynamics of COVID and ESG have changed things, but building on what went before. So my first point is, it's not a brave new world, it's the old world on steroids, so to speak. I think the second observation I'd make is, in the same way as we're moving to a hybrid model of working, I think we're starting to see a much more hybrid model of agency and sort of service provision. That before, you had big agencies, you had mid-sized independents, and you had freelancers. And I'm just seeing a huge merger of those previously sort of hermetically sealed areas with a lot more collaborative working, both within comms and outside comms. And again, we can come onto it later, but I've been involved in a lot of sort of experimental collaboration over the last year, not just with others within the comms community, but with people adjacent to what we do. So with employment lawyers, with business continuity and resilience experts, with business psychologists. So I think my overall take is COVID and ESG is accelerants, and hybrid service provision mirroring hybrid working. That's sort of my overall premise on what's going on.
Great, thank you. And Alison, as someone who's growing a business, are you using freelancers, and why and how is that fitting in with the rest of your business, the permanent staff?
Yeah, it's a real mix actually, and we have just taken on 2 new members of staff, but so we're a team of 8. We're still, really small. They're a mix of full-time, part-time, and then we work with freelancers too. So I think the reason for people increasingly going into freelance work is because I've heard some shocking reports of, I don't want to say mistreatment, but like really bad experiences working for some agencies. And I think that's really sad. And I think, I try to create a culture at ADIA where, everyone's quite, that everybody is responsible. We've got a really strong support network. And I know it's easier when you're a small team, but it's really important to me that everybody comes to work and they're really, really happy, and they really, really want to do a great job for their, not just for the team, but for the clients and everything. So, I'm quite confident that we've set up well at ADIA to allow, that sort of collaborative environment. So when we work with freelancers and they work with us, they see what's going on inside, and I think they're quite surprised at how well it works and how nice it is, but yeah, I was surprised, because I think before, until I started working with freelancers, I really wasn't aware of what was going on in other agencies. So that was quite an eye-opener for me, and so I think, going forward, we're really happy to work with freelancers because it gives us that flexibility that we can bring in expertise as and when we need it, and we don't, necessarily need it all the time. For instance, we're just about to put in a bid for a piece of work, and I really wanted to bring in an expert who is, we're on the crisis communication side. So, we're bringing that expertise in. So it's lovely to have a pool of freelancers that we can, go to when we need. But I do, I don't know if it's going to increase, if people are going to continue to work independently, or if they'll go back to working with agencies. I think it'd be interesting to see how that goes. But I want to encourage agencies to create that safe, nurturing, supportive environment where people do want to be employed rather than feeling like they have to go independent. But I understand from both sides why people would want to to be freelancers.
Yeah.
I'm happy to encourage that too.
Yes.
Liz,
Yeah.
can I just build on something that Alison said, if that's okay? Because I think that the language, and this isn't a semantic point, but the language of independent and freelancer is very interesting, because I think that, and there's literally no judgment in this next statement, but I think that the word freelancer has tended in the minds of some clients and agencies to sort of connote relatively sort of commoditized service that you bring people in to fill a resource gap. And I think in a way, I find the word independent more useful, because what I'm seeing is not merely a pool of floating flexible freelance resource, but some really accomplished senior people leaving major agencies, leaving Deloitte, and having sort of no desire ever to go back to the world of in-house or agency, partly because I think your point about culture, I don't buy the argument that big agencies are broken. I think the culture piece is something they're really struggling with. So I just think in debating, the rise of the independent and the freelancer, I think that distinction between freelance resource and independent expertise is really interesting.
Mm. Absolutely. I know it's something that we would discuss previous to this webinar on that distinction. And culture, well, let's explore culture before we come on to collaboration then. And do you think that is a reason why a number of people have decided to freelance? You've got the rise in more experienced freelancers. Do you think they always fit into this standard agency model and hence looking to do something different? Rod, what's your thoughts?
I've got a couple of thoughts. One is, I think, and there's a whole separate webinar or 10 in this, I think there is without question a considerable degree of ageism within the PR and comms sector. I think there's this sense that you feel as you kind of get into and through your 40s that this is a young person's game, and have they still got it? And I'm afraid I'm biased, but I see still some of the greatest innovation coming, go figure, from the people with the most experience. I think that from a cultural perspective, certainly, and again, I'm not criticizing per se, but a lot of the big holding groups, the Omnicoms, the IPGs, etc., can be so financially driven. I mean, the stories of people turning up at agencies with clipboards, doing desk utilization audits, the tyranny of the twice weekly revenue flash. And, you kind of get to the point where you think, am I doing this to shuffle Excel sheets, or am I doing it because I love advising clients and advancing practice? So again, I always want to avoid blanket judgments or criticisms, but I think you're seeing a lot of cultural challenge in the bigger agencies. I think with the rise of agencies like Milk and Honey and Don't Cry Wolf, you're seeing the mid caps, so to speak, absolutely nailing the cultural piece. So I think I wouldn't correlate cultural challenges with agency scale, but I do think there's some of that going on.
I mean, Alison, you seem to be developing a great culture from the stories that you were talking about earlier on. How are you making sure that this sort of agency life works in today's world, especially?
Yeah, and I want to say, clearly that I don't know of any particular agencies that have a bad culture. It's just things, and I've never worked in a big agency, so I'm it's just going by what people have told me, that there is there are some problems out there. How do we create a good culture? I think it's really by letting my staff know, the team know that I give them lots of independence, lots of responsibility, and I don't have I suppose we have account managers, account directors, etc. There's a certain hierarchy, but everybody gets involved in everything. And so even the youngest, newest staff can get involved in the strategy side. They're not just doing, menial work from day one. They're involved in client calls. They're involved, in everything, every part of the business. They might not be doing everything. Don't get me wrong, because we've got the senior account directors, etc. But they learn from the get-go how we operate. They get involved. There are no stupid questions, that everybody has the right to contribute, and that's it. And we've got a real mix of ages too. We don't tick all the diversity and inclusivity boxes that I'd like to, but we are still growing, so we're doing our best. But yeah, I think it's just I really love the whole thing about everybody feeling that sort of responsibility. It's a team effort, and that everybody can contribute. I think that's really, really important, and that we all support. Again, our senior account directors will be supporting the juniors, but the juniors, it's that reverse mentoring, isn't it? The juniors will be supporting the senior, and certainly me, when it comes to things like social media and things like that, because they know way more than I do. So I allow them to tell me what to do, and to, sort of like really shape certain agendas and certain plans. So yeah, that's literally how we're doing it at the moment.
Great. Let's move on to sort of the collaboration piece, which I know a lot of freelancers are keen to explore. On the Work Crowd, I mean, we have about 6,000 freelancers and independents, and often a freelancer may come on and then they win a big piece of project or win a big piece of work, and they need freelance support. So they flip and become a client. Rod, you also talked about how you formed a group of individuals from different expertises and backgrounds. So how did you go about finding these individuals? How does collaboration best work when you're working independently?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring to a thing that a group of us launched last year, kind of in, frankly, slightly too soon after lockdown last March, called the Decision Circle. And it was a group of 6 people. So there was myself as a sort of corporate issues reputation person. There was a consumer and brand marketing person, digital and social person, but also a business continuity and resilience expert, a business psychologist, and an employment lawyer. And we were there basically to help. Our little shtick was helping small and mid-sized organizations make high quality decisions at speed. Now, commercially, was it a roaring success? Not necessarily. I think we went too early. The model was a little too radical for the market. But what was really interesting was the amount of learning that we did and the amount of sort of bilateral relationships. So I'm now working on 3 different projects with different members of the circle. And I think the key for me in collaboration is, unlike agency, where the answer to any question is yes, and the answer to any question is, can you also do that? The answer is always yes. In the independent world, you have to, as a headhunter said to me once, you have to find a niche within a niche. You have to be known for, Rod is the person that you go to for situation X. And that doesn't mean that you pigeonhole yourself. But what I find is that people are very willing to say, I'm really brilliant at this. I'm pretty damn good at this. And the rest, I will bring others in. So I think that openness and honesty, having, forgive my French, a kick-ass network that you keep building. And then the final point, I think, is generosity. You cannot be generous enough as an independent to give of your time to things like this, to friends who phone up, because without getting all karmic and Buddhist on you, it does all come back eventually. So I think that we have to be more open to collaboration within comms, but we really have to be open to collaboration beyond comms. Yeah, lots more to say. I'll shut up uncharacteristically.
No, that's great, Rod. And actually, a question that someone's put forward already was around that new business piece. And Rod and Alison, maybe you could help on answering this. But they're experiencing a lot of work at the moment and worried what happens when the tap turns off, especially as an independent. And Rod, I know we talked a bit about that generosity piece, and maybe give some examples of what you're doing to ensure that that tap doesn't turn off. And maybe Alison, you can share some ideas on new business strategies for individuals. Alison, do you want to kick off first with some new business strategies, and then Rod, you can tell us about your expand on the generosity side?
Yeah, I think, well, enjoy it whilst it lasts. I think everybody, it's really interesting how this year has kicked off. There's a lot of business going on at the moment. I'm talking to lots of people, and everybody sort of feels this, well, not to say everybody, but a lot of people are feeling that real positivity, and business is happening. So yeah, I mean, certainly, as Rod said, it is about being generous. We've been going 7 years now, and in the early days, I was doing, I was giving, and still giving, but there's a lot coming back. And I think with creating relationships, sometimes people come back to you a year later, even 2 years later, and say, oh, I remember meeting you at XYZ place, and now I'm ready for PR, or I'd like to introduce you to somebody who I know who needs PR, or whatever it is that you're working on. So relationships are absolutely key in any business that you do, not just in our line of work, but just keep nurturing. It's it's not for the faint-hearted, running your own business and being an independent. It's absolutely not. But I think, when you're so passionate about what you do, and you know it's the right thing for you, and you're on your own path, and you will take the time, and you must take the time to connect with other people, build those relationships, and that whole giving thing is like, what can you do for them? And it might not be your work, it might be introducing them to someone who will be helpful to them. It's just thinking, what can I do to serve you in a way that's going to help your business? And like Rod says, that will come back to you, maybe not today, tomorrow, but certainly at some point it will. So.
Thank you, Alison. Rod, you've been doing some pro bono work to sort of help it with, well, not new business, but giving back. Do you want to sort of expand on your generosity kind of experiences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I probably do way too much, because I've got this sort of slavish belief in giving back. So, I mean, over the past year, I was deputy chair of the PRCA's Global COVID-19 Communication Task Force. I chair the EACD's Crisis and Risk Communication Working Group. I do this. I'm doing a session with Jackie Weaver later on. If anybody's free at 4 o'clock, the PRCA are in conversation with Jackie Weaver, and I've been asked to stand in for Francis on that. I think that on that sort of generosity, David Gallagher, who most people will know, said to me years ago when we were both on the PRCA board, is that with trade body and industry work, you have to give and receive in equal measure and in that order. So the generosity has to be genuine. You can't sort of do calculated, enlightened self-interest. If you're going to give, you've got to properly give. But as David taught me, you also need to be willing to reap the rewards, because they do come back. So I think, go in with generosity with no expectation of return. But when the return does come, don't be abashed, because frankly, you've earned it for all the right reasons. I think the flip side of that is where you shouldn't be generous. And where you shouldn't be generous is with giving away a load of your value for free. And I mean, someone said to me in my first month, and it was brilliant advice, if someone says to you, could you just ... Because could you just basically means, can you give me 25 years of experience for free? And I am absolutely ruthless and rigorous on, of course, not going on the clock like a chess player the second the phone goes. but I have value to give. I have business value to achieve for clients. I'm not going to give that away for free. So where I think generosity is not well advised is doing stuff for free and potentially being abused in the process, because there are people who will just take. You have to know your value, know your niche, and be absolutely clear on not giving value away.
Great. I mean, that nicely leads me on to sort of costings. How should you, as an independent, cost yourself? And also when collaborating, how do you go about costing that out? Rod, I mean, you've done some collaboration, so maybe you could lead with that.
Yeah, happily. I mean, I think with pricing and costing, again, a few thoughts. One is it needs to be pretty dynamic. You cannot be, you need to know what your range of maneuver is. You need to, I think, Alice, one of your colleagues at the Work Crowd even has a formula for this, which I can't remember. But, you need to work out what will the market bear for your level of expertise. And that's absolutely key. If you have carved out a specific niche with a specific value proposition that is sort of put in through the lens of what the customer gets and what the customer perceives as being value, then you can move up the value chain. If you allow yourself to be commoditized, if you allow yourself to simply slot in when they have a resource gap, then you'll end up lower down the value chain. So you need to know your range. You need to have a top end and a genuine bottom line, and say, I'm simply not going to work for an hourly rate that was what I was on as an account executive 20 years ago. It's just not what you should be doing. So yeah, dynamic, robust, and based on a clear niche and clear value proposition.
Great. Alison, how do you tend to work with freelancers? Do you tend to work sort of project-based, day rates, and how would you sort of cost them?
Yeah, so it depends on what the project is, to be honest. So generally we go by day rate. And so we've got a good idea of what the, average is in the market for different roles. So, I would say it's important to, yes, know your worth, and don't be afraid to charge, as they say, if you're going to compete on price, it's just, you're fast track to the bottom, isn't it? So yeah, definitely look at the industry average to benchmark where you're going to position yourself. Obviously, if you've got many years of experience, then you may want to step above that. But I think it's important to, if you are going to charge a little bit more, or you really do want to stand out, going to that point before, Alice, about, how do you get new business? I think you have to go to that point of any expert. So we work with a lot of experts in their field, helping to position them so that they become the authority, and basically people are coming to them rather than them having to constantly go and look for new clients. Well, how do you do that? You've really got to be putting out there your expertise. So doing the whole, thought leadership articles, sharing your top tips, your advice, you've got to do your own PR. As I mentioned, saw in the chat, there was somebody about management consulting, that as an expert, you've got so much potential, so many different opportunities today to share, who you are and why anyone should care, and that will help your credibility. So think about podcasts, think about speaking at events, think about getting into the newspapers as a spokesperson, into magazines, anything that's relevant to put you in front of your ideal client. You need to be doing this yourself, and then your day rate becomes less of an issue, because people will happily pay for your expertise.
Absolutely. Great.
Can I just jump in on that as well? Because I think that point about, this is all fundamentally about what we all do, which is differentiation. And I think back to the point about what your market proposition is. If people haven't seen it, there's an amazing sales trainer called Andy Bounds, who he's built this sales model which is based on the idea of afters. And what he means by afters is no one cares about your past. They only care about their future. And once you have finished working together, after, how is their world different? So, taking, me as a personal example, I could have talked about, I provide services in crisis preparedness, crisis management, and facilitated learning. I do, but that's not my proposition. My proposition is human preparedness, organizational resilience, and business performance, because those are the afters. If the client doesn't know how their world is transformed, as Andy Bounds says, so I'm just answering a question in the chat room, if they don't know how their world is different after you are finished, then they may not buy you, or they will buy you differently. So I think a niche within a niche, but also being clear on those afters, that's a key way of differentiating, I think. Sorry, Alice, to interrupt.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. We have had a question on IR35, and more specifically what the government is doing to support this freelance self-employed sector, which was sort of forgotten about by the government during the pandemic. And I know a lot of people fell between the gaps of sort of the furlough scheme and the financial support that the government provided. What do you think the government needs to do now in terms of supporting this rising economy and rising workforce? There seems to be a bit of a disconnect in terms of really getting what this community is about. Rod, maybe you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know all the trade bodies were pretty active on this, because, there was this huge category of, directors of companies, of which I am one, where you're not an employee and you're not self-employed, therefore you get just shy of Sweet Fanny Adams. So, you can't furlough yourself as a director. So there was zero support for a huge number of freelancers and independents who'd chosen to go down the registered company route. I mean, IR35, again, is a whole other, you can have entire webinars, and I'm sure you will. I think that, the shift in the rules where the onus of reporting is now on the user of the service rather than the service is a real challenge. I think that unless you genuinely only do one thing for one client, and also there are thresholds where IR35, if you have a turnover below a certain amount, you don't come within the ambit of IR35. So I think as long as you have multiple clients, you're not working from the client's office full time. But I think, the question about government is challenging, because very often public sector contracts are single location, single client. And ironically, the government has to think about the implications of that for its own service provision from independents.
Absolutely. And in fact, Rod, we have had a webinar recently on IR35. So if anyone has any questions, do have a look. It's recorded and it's on the Work Crowd blog page, and it's a great session which gives lots of insights into that. So a couple of people have talked a bit about the overcrowding of the potential freelance marketplace, and because of the people being laid off, turning to freelance as a career option. Or other people have asked about if they've been freelancing for a long time and now they want to go permanent again. Often their CVs are read and discarded because people think, oh, well, they're not committed and they'll end up moving and going to freelance again. So maybe you could tackle that one initially. How can people position themselves when deciding to move from freelancing to going permanent to make sure that they're being taken seriously?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, isn't it? I think, if you, for example, so if you do want to go back into, employment and work with a company, I think it's that same thing when you go for the interview. If you're lucky enough to get the interview, really show your enthusiasm for that business. You've got to do a little bit extra work again to stand out and make sure that they see that you genuinely want to work at that business. That's the sort of thing that I always look out for, when we're, like I said, we just took on 2 people for ADIA in the last 2 weeks. So, I want to know that they really want to work at ADIA, not just, an agency. but you know, how do you stand out to get that interview in the first place? I don't know. It's a tough one, isn't it? Because, you know, if you're working independently, I suppose you've got to give that, to communicate the compelling reasons why you want to make that shift, why it's important to you. And I think if you can get that across, because you're just getting it across in an email or in, you know, a covering letter. And by the way, always do a covering letter. I can't believe that. I know that, you know, I'm going to go off on a tangent and a rant, but you know, in the days of online, you know, job applications, you still need to do a covering letter, because you can't get any emotion across in a CV. It's just facts. You know, if you're applying for a job, it's a big deal. So you've got to get, you know, your personality across and all of that. So I would say, you know, really focus on that, really share your why, your purpose, you know, what it is you want, and why that company is, you know, the right fit for you, and why you're the right fit for them as well. So I think it's really the whole setup. It's this whole setup in applying, if you're going to make that transition from independent to an employment.
Yeah, and I think with my recruitment sort of hat on here, the story, the compelling story is so important. Also, why you chose to freelance, and then why you're looking to go permanent. But I remember, rewind 20 years ago when I first started out in recruiting, you know, people saw freelancers as something you did between jobs, or you couldn't quite get the job you wanted. But now it's not. The whole image of freelancing is, it's seen as a smart way of working. It's seen as a career choice. So businesses are much more open-minded to, you know, people having a freelance career, then a permanent, then a freelance, and a permanent. You know, also they recognize parents who have perhaps taken some time off to raise children, but have wanted to keep going with their career in a much more flexible way. So, you know, I think businesses are looking for great talent, and if you can communicate that in the right way, it really doesn't matter if you are presenting as a freelancer or as a permanent background. And then there's different ways in which you can go about finding jobs. So you can apply to job boards and then put your compelling story forward in a covering letter. If you're going via a recruiter, they should be putting a compelling story on your behalf forward for you. So there is lots of different means, and I think there is a shortage of great talent at the moment. So there are opportunities out there, and the market really is getting quite heated for good people.
Can I just add very quickly to that point that, you know, it shows another side of your personality if you've been, you know, brave enough to take that leap from paid employment, from being an employee to an independent or a freelancer, you know, however you want to call it. But I think it shows that independence, and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned, you know. So I don't think it should hold you back from then changing your mind to go back into employment. I would, you know, really again position it as a positive, that you're bringing something to the agency. You're bringing the fact that you're, you know, you can work well by yourself, that, you know, you've gone out and found your own clients. You know, that's a bonus for some agencies, you know. So really package together all the good, you know, aspects of what you've achieved, and you know, get that across.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone said that that a lot of recruiters have said freelance experience is not as valuable as in-house or agency experience. And I think, Alison, you've answered that very well. I disagree with that.
Yeah, I think anything can be valuable, you know, yeah. In-house, external. You've got to show off, you know, the benefits of what you've done. You know, there's pros and cons of everything in life, you know. So yeah, just make the most, maximize the pro side of it. And, you know, and if it didn't work out, don't be afraid to say it didn't work out. You know, lots of businesses fail. You know, you're not going to be the first, you're not going to be the last. So I think, you know, be very genuine, and don't be bashful about, you know, it didn't work. but I still have XYZ to offer, and and I'm really good at this. So don't be afraid or ashamed if it didn't work. There's plenty of very successful people out there who have had multitudes of failures. So
absolutely, absolutely. And I think what it comes down to is something actually that Rod talked about earlier, was about expertise. And businesses, both on our platform and on a permanent basis, look for expertise, either industry expertise or skill expertise. And if you can demonstrate that, whether you've actually got that from an in-house agency or freelance, it doesn't matter. They want that expertise. Now, if you were going for an agency business development role, they're looking for the skill, expertise of business development, which you may not have got from an in-house side. So it really is matching up what expertise with the job that's in front of you.
And Alice, just on that, because I mean, again, there was a question from Jenny earlier on about, do people view freelance and independents inferior to employed, and do they view agency as inferior to in-house? I mean, people have their prejudices left, right, and centre. They may or they may not. Again, back to this question of freelance versus independent consultant. Again, I sound like I'm down on the word freelance. I'm truly not. But I think my lesson from the first 18 months is that if you sit there like a sort of, how would I put this, like a baby bird waiting for a piece of new business to drop in, it's not going to happen. You have to know what that, the pinhead of skills is with you on the top of it. You have to be willing to prototype things very fast. I've learned that even though I don't love it, you've got to ideally have a product or two. You've got to, as a colleague used to call it, pin a tail on it and call it a donkey. You've got to make it really easy to buy. And I think what I'm seeing is, starting to collaborate. Stuart Bruce, who some of you may know, and I, collaborated on a major pitch last year, beat 5 agencies, including a global network and a UK network, because we had a combination of specific expertise at a very decent price point, but still good value, with real proof of agility and sort of personal focus and personal service. So I think you just have to, again, be really clear why you and nobody else. Because if you're not clear, then the customer won't know why they should buy you.
Great, absolutely. We've had one last question before we close off for the webinar, which again, it's a bit about experience. But do you think it's useful having a stint as a consultant? So do you think agency experience is useful to make you a better consultant in comms and PR? So I guess that more refers to the in-house versus agency. Rod, you've have always been consultancy?
I've never done in-house, so I'm deeply biased. I mean, I'm bound to say it feels invaluable, because in a way, the process of marketing and prospecting and product development and packaging and sales and blah, 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 it's what I've done for 25 years. However, it's a lot less obvious doing it for yourself when you suddenly go, I used to be part of an organization of 2,000 people. Now it's me. So there is a culture shock of taking agency skills and synthesizing them and distilling them into independence. But I don't think in-house is necessarily less valuable. I just think you bring different skill sets.
Great, thank you. Alison, what's your sort of final remarks on that?
Okay, so when I'm building my team, I want a mix of skill sets. So I've got a mix of in-house or team members that have had in-house experience and agency experience. I suppose if push came to shove, I prefer agency experience, because they generally tend to be people who like to wear many hats during the day. And, as we have so many clients, we're wearing many different hats throughout the day. And if you wanted to just focus on one thing in one day, that would be very difficult for us. But definitely having that in-house experience helps. So again, I think it really depends on where you're going and what you want to do. If you much prefer working on, one client and, focusing on that, then, that in-house is definitely going to be better for you. But know that an agency may not want that sort of skill set, because they definitely need you to be working on many different things. So
absolutely. Well, I've just had a pop-up from someone who is based out in Rio de Janeiro. So we've got a truly global community here today. And Rod and Alison, thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights. We had over 100 sign-ups to the event. So clearly there is, the rise of the freelancer, the independent. I know it's happening. The Work Crowd, we're getting more and more projects coming on board. We're getting more and more freelancers signing up. And the need for collaboration, whether that's from different industry sectors, different geographical locations, is clearly, there is a demand for that. And by the diverse community that signed up today, that sort of demonstrates that. So thank you, Rod and Alison, for coming along today. And I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Can I chuck in one last thought, Alice?
Go on, Rod.
Obviously, in time on a tradition, which is be generous, but also take others' generosity. I don't know if you know that GIF of Homer Simpson sort of backing into a hedge. Well, becoming independent is like the opposite of that. There is just this world of generous people who, having spent years in agency, kind of trying to stab each other in the kidneys to win the client brief, are doing the opposite. So be incredibly open to other people's generosity, build relationships. And, it's a collaborative thing with, to close on a cliche, we're genuinely all in this together. And if you get that and be open to the collaboration, great things will happen. So it's not as lonely as it seems if you make it so.
Great, thank you, Rod. And Rod's going to be on a webinar for the PRCA later on today, which you mentioned earlier on. Once again, it's 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock, in conversation with Jackie Weaver. I'm pretending to be Francis Ingham at the last minute. So if you're not in the UK, you've no idea what we just said. But if you are in the UK, you have to be there at 4 o'clock.
Lovely. Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Bye-bye.